Welcome to today's session, everyone.
We are Pre-Med CC, a student-led organization established in the fall of 2021.
Our goal as an organization was to create an online program for pre-medical students at community colleges and universities, with the hope of guiding the next generation of diverse and inclusive physicians.
And while we advertise our organization as being for community college students, our events are open to anyone.
We realize that finding guidance and mentorship in a pre-med journey can be especially challenging for first-generation pre-med students,
people that lack the financial resources, or just those who do not know people in the medical field.
One of the best parts about our events is that they are virtual, so you can do it from the comfort of your own home.
We typically have events on Fridays from 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and on Saturdays from 11 a.m. to 12:30 Pacific Standard Time.
If you aren't able to attend the event, all of our sessions are uploaded on our YouTube channel.
Many of our sessions will end up with a Q&A with the speakers.
Any questions that you have, you may put it in the Q&A session on Zoom, and our team members will read them and have them answer.
After you have attended our event, you can log into our website and complete the quiz, which will contain questions pertaining to our session today.
If you score 70% or higher on the quiz, you will be awarded a certificate to show that you attended our session today.
If you want to stay connected with the upcoming events or just want to tell your pre-med friends about the Pre-Med CC, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok as @PreMedCC.
All right, everyone, welcome. We're glad that you're able to join us today. I know that some people emailed us saying that they had graduation today, so congratulations for the people that are not here and are graduating. We're honored to have Mr. Dean Nabers, who's the Dean of Admission and Recruitment at the Loyola University Chicago Stritch School of Medicine. Dean Nabers is a graduate of Whittier College with a BA in political science and worked in banking and decided to go into law school, but then fell in love with teaching and has been in teaching most of his career. And he also has a master's in electronic business from Golden Gate University. He has been the director, has been in admissions since 2002 and was the director of admission at the Stritch School of Medicine. And since 2015, he has been at Loyola University Chicago Stritch School of Medicine. And we're glad that he is able to join us today and to share his wisdom, knowledge, and secrets.
Thank you very much, Jobin. It's very nice to be here. I am happy for all you grads out there, and hoping that hopefully the information I provide to you will be of help to you. Hopefully you can see my screen. You can see the banner here, which is the focus of my remarks today. I wanted to be able to cover as much ground as possible. And I wanted to not assume that everyone out there is going about it the same way. So I'm hoping that this will have some resonance with all of you out there, and obviously there'll be an opportunity for you to have more information about how to reach me directly if you want to take the conversation offline. So for those of you who are not familiar with Loyola University Chicago, we are one of 5 allopathic medical schools in the city of Chicago. We are a Jesuit medical school, which means that we have a Catholic heritage. Part of that heritage is rooted in the Jesuit sect of the Catholic Church, which tends to be associated with research, with bold and innovative ideas, with social justice advocacy. Way back when, the Jesuit sect were the Catholics who were first to emerge upon new civilizations and provide opportunities to share resources in an educational construct. So there tends to be a lot of threads that tie through Jesuit and affiliated sects, which are often considered to be Ignatian, from the founder of the Jesuit sect, St. Ignatius. Those tie-ins are very much a part of the fabric of the Loyola network, which extends all across the world. And one of the great benefits of being in this type of environment is that our students do missionary work in various cities, in various areas around the world, and have embarked upon that. Even as we speak, we had a group lead today for Belize to do service work to help build homes there. So my focus today will be just talking about like admissions as an opportunity to understand more about how it works in the medical school realm. As was stated, I have been doing this work for quite some time. My first experience working in medical school admissions was 2005. So I've been at this, almost 18 years. This will be my 18th cycle coming up. So I've gathered a lot of really interesting tips and understand from a various perspectives, and two really excellent institutions, both Loyola and University of Chicago, in a sense how medical school admissions and how the discernment process works. So for us, we have, been a part of a holistic process. I was fortunate to have this as my first indoctrination into medical school admissions when I was at the University of Chicago, and was able to bring this to Loyola University Chicago. I think that experiences, attributes, and metrics tend to be kind of in that order, really the most discernible factors about what holistic review is all about, diving into those details within your application. And obviously, metrics are quantified details that are kind of available through transcripts and through other data elements within the application, but it's often the experiences and the attributes that have most impressive weight in our process. And it's often the case that these are some of the things that most candidates tend to overlook, overshadow, or not really give a lot of detail about. So I'm going to hopefully leave you with the understanding and idea that you have a great deal of impact on your own success. If you think of it from the terms that I have described here, starting with experiences, then attributes, and then academic metrics in that order, and you give yourself the opportunity to really demonstrate and articulate your experiences and your attributes, I think you'll find that your application will be more successful. And again, when we think about qualitative features of a candidate, these are just some of them that you're looking at here on the page. Authenticity, maturity, empathy, adaptability, perseverance. These are words that we hear every single day at the Stritch School of Medicine in, context of how a student has overcome a challenge. Just today, we had a student who was one of our DACA students talking about how she went to the testing center and had her DACA work authorization card as her valid ID and was turned away because they didn't see it as valid ID at the site. I mean, what could be more horrifying for a student? But yet she picked herself up, persevered, took the exam anyway, and passed. Had to do it at a different time. But it was a valuable lesson that she learned, that you really often never know when adversity is going to strike or need to be addressed. So again, I think these are some of the base elements that our students possess. And how do we kind of identify these things? As I said, it's often really hard for candidates to really describe themselves in ways that provide depth and meaning. I think there tends to be a real hesitancy to be unique, and there's more of a propensity for a candidate to try to be like everybody else, to think about who's been successful, to crowdsource the details, get that game plan or that game book, and really go at it from that perspective. But I really think that is, especially for the type of students that are probably on this call, a real mistake, because you can really gain a lot of really important and significant depth about a person by providing an opportunity for the reader to understand how unique you really are. So in the first instance, reflection is a very important tool a candidate has to help every committee understand more about who they are and what their motivation is. And ultimately, that is really what is inspiring the personal statement, to really understand your true motivation for medicine. The people that support you are often characters in your story in the personal statement. And when I read the personal statement and I feel like it's story driven, I get a little bit less enthusiastic about trying to finish it. But if I find that it's a real example of your tenacious desire for medicine, if I find that it's a real example of how you are with people, and especially how you've been supported by others to share your vision and to shape your dream and your goals, then I'm a lot more interested in the kind of person you may be in person. And that's often one of the things that you really have to think about is get the interview. That's really the best way to get the seat. And the application provides all the information necessary to help every committee understand if we want to meet you in person. So the only way to really get that, and again, if you're trying to find a partner or you're trying to find a friend, it's often really important to try to share specific things about yourself that help them understand that you are someone they want to get to know. And I would say that that same process is part of what constructing an application is all about. How you've formed your decision to move forward in this vocation of medicine is very important to understand. So by virtue of understanding yourself and by articulating who you are, we often get a really good understanding of what you will bring to a group, what dynamic you will bring to a cohort. And that is often the inner working that is happening within the committee process, trying to blend a lot of different personalities and backgrounds and different, ways of thinking. So no matter what kind of person you are, no matter how you can describe yourself personally, it is important that you understand who you are, but never think that who you are is not a good fit for an environment, because you never know what an environment is missing. Every environment needs people with all of these different characteristics to aid and assist in the pre-health or the health environment. So again, care for others is a way in which you can demonstrate your own personal formation. Sometimes it's important to place yourself into a professional environment to get a sense for the kind of person you are in that environment. So obviously medicine is going to put you in a very stressful, busy, engaging environment where there are people who are really in need of your help. And there are people willing to support that effort to help the patient. So you have to work with them. You have to work with the patient. You have to understand and acknowledge their pain, their suffering. You have to be really sensitive to all the things that are happening. And sometimes those things are happening so fast that it's unconscionable to think of how you can actually work in that environment. So it is a very important thing to study and test yourself in that environment. So professional formation is a way to help evidence your suitability for a career in medicine, and in particular to really find yourself in that environment. Is it comfortable for you to be in that pace of environment? Is it, I've actually heard so many stories from candidates. One candidate at some point told me that she had an aversion to strong smells, that she had like this, regurgitating reflex every time she smelled something that didn't appeal to her. And this was a young woman who had earned an interview to our medical school. And I thought to myself, have you really thought about how you're going to exist in a medical environment and in a training or vocational environment of helping others with that aversion? So again, I think having tested that assertion, having been a part of enough clinical experiences to get a sense for that, should have been a priority for that young woman. And I would hope that all of you have thought about the kinds of experiences that you can, sort of see yourself in and find a place to really develop your understanding and your interest in medicine. And often it's the case that there's not time to do this or there's not opportunity to do this, but it's really important to know that this is a very competitive process. The things that are maybe hard for you to do, other candidates are doing with relative ease. And, again, that's sometimes those are the distinctions that make or break a decision about bringing someone in. And as I said, experiences really matter. It's often the case that there are so many, touch points academically that are similar. And when we start really trying to identify the differences among candidates, it really does come down to the types of experiences they've had, how sustained they've been. Shadowing is a very passive experience, but there are candidates out there that are doing very active things, working as scribes, working as medical assistants, working to earn certification as EMTs or licensure. And again, nurses, people from all sorts of backgrounds in the health professions are finding medicine and going into that path of allopathic care as an option. So again, it's very important to really try to immerse yourself in the experiences that matter towards your goal. This is a snapshot from our first year class. They're actually now second years as of today. They took their final exam. So our first years are now our second years, but this is a snapshot of the averages in terms of experiences that they brought to us in last year's cycle. Now, this isn't a goal that everyone should try to achieve, but I think it does help you understand more about the pivots that students or candidates are making to find their opportunities to really professionally form. And paid clinical experience is often how they're doing that. And again, when the numbers reveal themselves, those hours spent in a paid clinical experience or in a research experience, which also might be paid, tells us a couple of things. It tells us that candidates are taking time from undergraduate coursework or graduate coursework to work, to settle into a position, to really get to know it on a 9-to-5 basis or sometimes more. And that is a very critical asset that they carry into the cycle. They have knowledge that they can share. They have stories they can tell. They have, anecdotes and advocates and patient care experiences to reflect upon. And again, I think that even though service is a very strong component of our candidate pool's experiences, when it comes to time and when it comes to how that time is spent, especially when you consider now that gap years are becoming so much more pervasive, we're finding that candidates are finding those opportunities in the world of work. So again, reflecting on our first year, second year class, there are just a lot of distinctions in terms of demographics that are starting to emerge. Now, we were always very active with the DACA pool. Since 2014, we are the first medical school to not only admit DACA students, but to graduate them and see them as professional physicians in attending positions now. So again, that number of 2 represents the fact that there are so many more opportunities now for DACA students to achieve success. Now, we also understand some of the limitations that are part of that experience, and knowing that undocumented students now who do not have access to DACA or do not have an opportunity to apply and receive DACA status are going to now be kind of take us back to an era where there was no access. And that's a very scary thing for all of us. And I would hope that great minds could come together and make either DACA a new opportunity for others who are in that position, or to find some reasonable way to make DACA a permanent opportunity for renewal and for new application. But we're starting to see dimensions of other areas like first generation or foreign born students become more engaged in our process and become more successful in our matriculant pool. Reapplicants as well. So we always look for the silver lining. We're always counseling and helping candidates be stronger candidates from one year to the next. And again, I think that's a really good opportunity for us to recruit. It's also a really good way for us to help students understand how our environment works here at Stritch. I won't spend a lot of time on numbers, but I will show you that there are consistencies within our process that reveal where we are in terms of our science GPA and our overall GPA and our MCAT score. Like those numbers have been pretty consistent for the past 3 or 4 years, and we're okay with that. We're not trying to become a medical school that has, these gaudy MCAT scores that average out at 520 and above every year. I mean, I've been in that environment before, and I can tell you that that's not who we are. But some schools are like that. They have good reasons to be. But I think if we're going to be really trying to fill the gaps of physician shortages across the country that are pending and looming in our near future, we need to be more thoughtful about what does it really take to be successful in medical school. And if it's coming down to quantitative analysis of numbers based on tests, based on averages for science core, then so be it. But I believe that there are probably a lot more opportunities for us to build a stronger physician pool if we think about the qualitative experience and the qualitative dimensions of candidates, particularly when we look at language and ethnicity and race. The notion that we now have almost as many tri and quadruple lingual candidates who become students in our pool as we do those who are bilingual is just an amazing thing. And that's another real strong attribute that's emerged in our process. So I'm going to start speeding up because I want to try to get through all of these tips. But again, thinking about academic preparation, this is a really big discernment area for us. And it's not the case that we have cutoffs for the MCAT or GPA. As a matter of fact, those averages represent a range of scores across the 10th to 90th percentile. The MSAR can always reveal that information to you. But what we're looking at in terms of preparation is often the details, the subtle details that tell us about the trends within your application, particularly in the quantitative realm. The science GPA, and we've understood very much that science GPAs are broken down into biology, chemistry, physics, and math. And we focus a lot on the biology and chemistry courses that you've taken. We're going to look at those courses. We're going to examine how rigorous they are. Obviously, everyone knows about OChem and biochem. We're going to look at your progression in terms of when you took those courses and did you follow those courses with more challenging coursework? Did you take those courses at your home institution or did you take them online? Did you take them elsewhere? And again, being a community college student engenders a lot of movement across different campuses. But the thing you have to really understand is there's a really unnecessarily unfair consideration in some cases for the community college experience. And that unfairness can sometimes be tied to rigor. Is it as challenging a course as a state school or a four-year college or university? And I've always said, good students do well regardless of where they are. So if you struggle in community college courses, it's going to be really, really important for you to try to advance into a more rigorous environment like a post-bac program or a graduate program to show that you have the ability to sustain, high academic consistency and sustainability in a more rigorous environment. And how does the MCAT play into that? Well, the MCAT is almost like the great correlation. It's really the kind of thing that we look at to see, okay, if this test is an indication of success on standardized testing, which is going to be a big part of your academic experience as a medical school trainee, again, with the board exams that you have to take in your within your first 4 years and then subsequently into residency, these MCAT scores become predictors of not just how you might do on an exam, but how you prepare and how you anticipate and how you respond to standardized tests. So the number of tests may represent the number of times it was important for you to change up a strategy, to rethink your previous strategy towards taking an exam. Progression of scores can be a positive thing. It can also sometimes lead to signs of test anxiety. So it's always important to take the exam when you're ready and to try your best to prepare like it's something that you're going to use as a behavior for preparation in future iterations of standardized testing. Because medical school is largely computer-based testing now. Every exam you take is based on a computer. And then, of course, you're going to a Prometric site for the board exams. These are not warm and comfy places. It's not your couch or your sofa. This is a testing center. In some cases, that can be very, overwhelming and intimidating. So you have to really find a way to settle into testing and be able to make it very ordinary for yourself with success applied, and particularly in the chemistry and biology sections of the test. We understand that CARS is going to be a limitation, particularly for second language speakers. We apply a far less scrutiny on the CARS than we do on the chemistry and biology subscores. So service is a very important part of being a physician, or trying to advance in the health profession. So again, service has to be something that is part of who you are. It's got to be a behavior. It's got to be a lifelong sustainable progression. So again, that's another thing that's looked at in this process. Just checking off boxes to say that you've done service experiences is really not going to be enough to help us understand how sustainable that interest is. So you really have to think about that, and you have to really think about what community you feel most affinity towards in terms of service. That's always going to be a question that you're going to be asked to sort of articulate in our process. I often get this question about research. Is it important to have research? I would say it's important to have a desire for inquiry, whether that is a research project that you've done, whether that's, I've dabbled in some form of research, I've understood and have learned certain methods. I have, done an honors thesis. I have been in an honors program. It's always important to find ways to demonstrate that part of yourself. It's not always important to suggest that I published or I acquired novel methods and now I'm doing this type of research. I mean, again, those things can be very important to you professionally. And the other thing I would say is that, inquiry is going to be largely a part of your experience as a student, a trainee in medicine. And there are some specialties that are going to require a certain level of that inquiry in the form of research if you choose that specialty. So by not having this type of evidenced experience on your application, you could be signaling to some schools that you're not really interested in that level of physician vocation, which is fine, but that may limit your options. Leadership is always going to be a trait examined in this process, and that is simply because when you become a physician and an attending physician at that, you'll understand that there's a hierarchy that exists all the way through the training funnel when it comes to becoming a physician. And at the very end of that funnel, an attending physician has a lot of power and leadership over a team, and that can be wielded in a positive way. And we would hope that it always would be wielded in a positive way, but we also know that sometimes that can also be detrimental. So understanding your impact, the type of leader you are, that's a really good litmus test for many medical schools to see if the training environment that they have is suitable for what you want to do and your skills and your talents. Don't know why my screen is not moving. Let's try that. Okay. I would assert that most of you think you're non-traditional students, and I would probably agree with you. It just seems that most students now are non-traditional, and that's really simply defined these days as 1 year distance from your undergraduate coursework. So even if you've done a graduate degree or you've done a post-bac program, or you've taken time to do a gap year or 2 gap years or 3 gap years and you're working, all that is the non-traditional path. So that actually now constitutes the majority of candidates going into the allopathic pool. So it's no longer enough just to say that you're non-traditional. It's going to be really important for you to define what that means. Have you changed your career? Did you have to work and take time to save money to get to the point where you could reasonably consider medical school. Obviously, family considerations are sometimes part of that. But again, that adds yet another layer of nuance to your application. It actually adds more to that substantive sort of element of who you are. So bringing that real world experience into your application can be helpful for you. And again, can be a very distinguishing characteristic of your application. Again, leadership, very important. I think I just went backwards on that. So again, qualitative skills are very important to demonstrate. And sometimes it's very hard to write about yourself in a way to get all of these different skills across. So that's why it's really important to have really good advocates who write letters for you and support your application with evidence from their perspective about a lot of these qualities. So if you're out there looking for someone to write a letter for you, the best way to determine if that person is a good person to write a letter for you is really their knowledge of you within the scope of these 6 different elements. And often it's the case that there's a focus on problem solving. So a lot of faculty who have taught you are going to, think through a way to reflect on how they taught you and how you learned in their classroom. But there's always going to be a real value in understanding the kind of person you are outside the classroom and how you may have adapted or how you've kind of reacted or worked with others in the real world. Emotional intelligence is often now studied through quantitative assessments like Preview and the Casper exam. We have rejected both exams for various reasons. This is to say that we use holistic review exclusively to identify these traits. The form of our discernment is really investigating your qualitative components of your application, personal statement, how you've written about your experiences, your responses to the prompts in the secondary application. Obviously, all of those things are going to help us immensely. And in some cases, the prompts within our secondary are intentionally drawn to reveal more of that understanding about who you are. I don't know why I keep going back to that slide. That's weird. Okay.
Maybe it's subconsciously it's really important. So
there's some focus on leadership that somehow being pulled back. But yeah, I know, I agree. It's very important. So I want to fly through these. I think I have about 15 minutes to kind of just talk about some tips here. I always say apply when you're ready. Don't let anyone force you into applying. Again, I always consider having everything in front of you and not behind you to be the best way to apply. So you're not thinking about, well, what if my MCAT score comes back and it's too low? Is that going to ruin my opportunities? What if I'm not finished with my coursework, but I'm going to apply anyway? Again, all those trends and outcomes are going to be an important part of the discernment of your application. So you want to be sure that they match up. You want to be sure that if they don't, that you have written about or qualitatively expressed how you understand that to be not a risk. Again, if you're impatient and haphazard, it's not necessarily going to be a good look for you. It's almost like the disheveled look doesn't work when you're trying to meet someone, and it certainly doesn't work when you're trying to advance your application. So being very thoughtful about the timing and the opportunity to give yourself the full extent of the cycle, and not, shorten that cycle by applying in, November or December, thinking you have just as much of a shot as if you did in June. That the reality is that you don't, and you should probably wait until you've given your application more time to be out there in that cycle. Obviously, there are going to be big distinctions among institutions. The thing about medical school, allopathic medical school, is that we're all adherent to competencies that we must teach you to graduate you. And obviously the standardization of those competencies is revealed within the structure of the board exams, placement in the match. A lot of those things are relative to standards. So there's going to be a practical connection among all medical schools in the allopathic world. But there are some significant differences. And those are the things you really have to investigate. That's what you should spend most of your time really trying to do in terms of trying to understand how you as an individual will work or match or fit within a particular environment. I say that cost consideration should be last and not first. And you're probably thinking to me, why is he saying that? Well, the thing is, I mean, there's lots of things that I could tell you, but the one thing I would say, and I've said this quite a bit, you're making an investment in yourself. When you consider the debt that most candidates carry or most students carry as medical school debt, the average across the country is $200,000. And that's the total 4-year debt burden. When you think about physician salaries and what they average, they end up being around $250,000 a year. So if you think about it from that perspective, and yeah, it takes a while to get to that point, but you could literally pay off your student loans under 10 years if you were making that kind of money in the future. And that's the goal, right? No one really goes into this and takes on debt thinking that they're not going to be successful. And conversely, you shouldn't go into this thinking that you're going to get all of your costs paid for through scholarship and not be successful. I think success is always going to be an outcome. So you can't really focus too much on cost because, again, that could be putting you in a position to not get the kind of training you want or not in the type of environment that you want, or again, there's always going to be some value that an institution has. And if you're not focused on that and you're kind of focused on, well, what's best for me right now? Again, there's lots of practical reasons for that thought process, but I've talked to so many candidates who become students, who have graduated, become residents and attending physicians now, and they just always tell me that that should have been the last thing that they were thinking about at the time. So again, more details about your program, thinking about the distinction. Obviously, there's a big question often about MD and DO. There's about 150 MD programs, about 80 DO programs. Obviously, it's important to try to, increase your opportunities, increase your chances. So applying to both is not a terrible idea, but you should never apply to a program you don't intend to matriculate to, and really know the distinction of DO and MD before you decide to apply to both. Professionalism is becoming a really big topic of conversation in committees and a really big element of discernment. Obviously, it's hard to sort of see you in this environment as candidates because everyone looks the part, they dress professionally, they come to the interviews in a professional manner. So again, these are things that are helpful to remember, but also things that can be signaled by those who are advocating for you. So if you know that you have good professional considerations from your world of work, then it would be to your advantage to have those types of folks brought into your advocacy pool. I think, yeah, sorry. So again, I think it's important to understand about how your path is different than others, not to try to approximate or compare yourself to others. It's important to be an individual in this process. You'll obviously have more success if you do that. In terms of the MCAT application, it's a lengthy application. There's a lot of details there, but first and foremost, it's really important to consider addressing all the questions in detail. Some are going to be easy, others may be more challenging, but they all give a very significant number of attributes to the committee and help them pivot on any of those attributes that might be important for them to maintain within their pool. And you aren't going to know that, but you're obviously not going to put yourself into a competitive situation if you're not providing the information. So always try your best to fill out the application to its fullest extent. There are some things that you can do to demonstrate more about yourself or to expand upon your own qualitative attributes. Unfortunately, the disadvantage statement has been changed this year to state other impactful experiences. And I think that is a way for AMCAS to try to not maybe mitigate disadvantage, but to give people who have less disadvantage more opportunity to talk about themselves. But I cringed when I hear that, and I cringed when I saw that they had done this. But again, I think you just have to turn it into an opportunity. And again, the more unique you are and the more adversity you face, more perseverance you've had to express. Sometimes these are opportunities to share more about your fascinating attributes and skills. There are obviously 15 experiences that you can write about. I would highly, highly recommend completing all 15. Demonstrating that they're all meaningful is important, but 3 are most meaningful. So they should convey a real sense of meaningfulness to you and sustainability about impact. I like to think of the experiences, the write-up of the experiences as a sandwich with 2 thin layers of bread on either side. The 2 thin layers are going to be what you did in that experience and why. The detail in the sandwich is going to be what meaningfulness came out of that experience. Impact. Did it have impact on you and your motivation? Did it have impact on others as a successful element of service, or a successful foray into the clinical realm, or a successful academic experience? Again, that is where you can really build up those experiences and really reflect on them more meaningfully. I would say to stay away from doing that within the personal statement. The personal statement should really be more about you as an individual, about your support team elements, about your sustainable drive for service and working with others. But experiences are snapshots, and what you're really trying to help us understand is why that snapshot compelled you to that particular consideration for the time that you did. And then what you're going to take from that experience-wise, how that's going to make you a more impactful person, a more disciplined individual, a more empathic individual. Those are the things that really come through in the experience write-ups. So again, applying is, again, based on the MCAS process, it's verified, you complete the supplemental application, and voila, you have a completed application. This is a model for holistic review that was actually brought to all medical schools back in the mid-90s as a way for us to develop holistic review and a holistic process within our discernment of candidates. And it still holds. There are many schools that still adhere to this process. Our review committee is comprised of many people. Over 100 people are going to be reviewing applications from candidates once they're completed. We have a very large pool of candidates, often over 9,000 applications. We tend to get into that range of 600 to 700 who interview with us. And so, again, the interview is an opportunity to be seen. It's an opportunity to reflect on what you have constructed qualitatively within your application. So never forget those things. It's obviously a way for you to validate and further express an understanding of the quantitative nature of your application. So never hide from that. Always be actively listening, actively engaged. Even in the virtual realm, it's very easy to tell if a person is engaged. I often, my staff will tell me that, I had an interview with someone, I really liked them, but they spent all their time looking off to the side. They never looked at the green dot on their computer. And you would think that that wouldn't be a big deal, but eye contact is still a part of the process of connecting with people. So when you mute your screen or you're not fully present, it's hard to make that connection. And still, even in the virtual realm, there's a lot of reason why that's important. Most medical schools are doing virtual interviews. We are still doing about a 50-50 split between in-person and virtual, keeping that choice open. So again, a lot of what we talk about, I went back to the leadership one. Excellent. A lot of what we're talking about in the interview process for us is really just an opportunity to understand and to correlate a lot of the skills and talents that you share with us within your application. And it's a conversation. These are ultimately the values that we feel most aligned with our student body and with our construct as a Jesuit community. And these are the things that will resonate with us in conversation. So if you are sharing your own kind of consideration for how you care for the whole person, whether that whole person is yourself or for others, how you have looked at education and your educational pathway as a service-oriented pursuit and seeking out social justice for others who are disadvantaged or on the margins. Again, that is a very important representation of the type of person that will sustain their interest over time in medicine. And certainly having reverence and respect for community means that you can treat patients as the Hippocratic Oath will state, no matter what their background is, racially, economically, social or sexual orientation wise, you're going to have respect and reverence for anyone that comes within your care. For us, an extension of that can be derived through faith and spiritual formation, which I haven't really talked a lot about, but that's one of the elements of our institution that kind of separates us from others. And again, these attributes are very important. In some cases, we find that patients come to us because we're a Catholic hospital, because they identify with their own kind of considerations for religious and spiritual connection. And this is where they want their treatment to take place. Obviously, one of the things that differentiates our environment is having that element of ministry, having that element of chaplain care in our hospital. That's one of your rotations, as a matter of fact, is to rotate with a chaplain on their rounds and get a sense for how that relationship to medicine is different than the practitioner of care. But again, being a faith-based institution does have a particular calling. And again, that may or may not be for everyone, but that is a value add that we have. So I am going to wrap this up with leaving you with this statement. Being prepared for a long process, medical school application is challenging to begin with, but the cycle itself is 13 months. When you submit your application in May to AMCAS, and again, I'm saying you should submit it in May because that's early. That gives you the full benefit of the entire cycle for your application to be considered. And it can come down to the last month of the cycle in June or July when that decision is made to bring you in. So don't ever give up throughout the duration of that process. Be reflective, provide updates, give your own personal growth time to demonstrate its interest in an institution. And again, we always encourage candidates to update their applications with their professional updates, personal updates, academic updates throughout the cycle. Those updates are just being uploaded into their portal. They're not coming through AMCAS, but they definitely demonstrate to us interest over time. And as we get closer and closer to that matriculation date, if we need candidates and we know that someone's interested and we still have a pool of candidates that aren't interested, well, the one that's interested is most likely to get the call. So this is my information. This QR code here is a way to provide your phone or tablet. If you take a picture of that with my contact information, the bit.ly link is a link to an inquiry form that will provide you with additional information as well. I do consults, 30-minute consults. So if you are seeking out more information or want to have a one-to-one with me, best way to do that is to email me, and I will send you a link to a sign-up sheet, and we can do a 30-minute Zoom conversation whenever you have the opportunity. So I will stop sharing and see what questions we have.
Thank you so much. The first question that we have is there a heavier weight on the last 30 units when looking at the metrics?
Yes, that's a good question. So you've obviously seen our fact sheet where we describe our prerequisite requirements, looking at 30 credits as the component of consideration as a minimum. So what I would say about why 30 is it tends to be our consideration that in some cases, candidates who are doing science-based coursework outside of undergrad, and let's say that you are an undergrad who decided to major in history or major in English, but you're going to go to medical school, so you have to do that essential core of science coursework. Most of those courses are going to be kind of packaged into a graduate program or a post-bac program that'll be roughly 24 to 28 credits. So we've applied that knowledge over time to be able to say to a typical post-bac career changer who's deciding to come to medicine late, you still have a viable application. Now, I would say for the most part, when we see applications, they're going to be significantly over 30 credits of science because they are biology majors or they're chemistry majors or they're neuroscience majors. But we didn't want the post-bac to think that they didn't have a shot. So we tried to match up our prerequisites with a baseline that we felt would be significant, enough to sort of get a sense for where a candidate could be on a progression scale with their science core, but not to eliminate candidates that were coming to the process late.
Thank you. Is there a difference between applying on June 1st versus June 15th for your university?
Well, it's always going to matter for AMCAS because AMCAS is the entity that has to verify your application. So when I say submit in May, AMCAS is prepared to verify applications in May. And now it takes a certain amount of work. It takes a certain amount of people in their environment to do that work. And it's typically about 6 to 8 weeks to verify an application. But if you look at AMCAS stats, it will sort of look like an upward trend. So this will be, May to June to July, and then it starts to go, maybe flatline a little bit and down. But my sense is that they slow down the verification in July or August because that's where they're at their peak. They have the most number of applications to verify. So instead of it taking 6 to 8 weeks, in some cases it might take longer. So by the time it's verified, that's when it comes to us. That's when it comes to the medical school. And when it comes to the medical school, that's when you get your secondary application. So now if you've thought about this over 10 weeks, your application is being verified and then it hits our servers and then we send you a supplemental application. Now, how long is it going to take you to complete the supplemental application? Is it going to take you one night? Is it going to take you 2 weeks? So again, that is the delay in actually processing your application. MCAT scores, application verified, secondary or supplemental prompts answered, letters received, all those things have to hit our server, hit our system in order for you to be complete. So the longer you wait, the more things that can be delayed in that process. And because most candidates are applying early and they're ready to verify as many as they can for the first couple of months, when they get to their maximum number, and sometimes like in 2021, they had more applications than they knew what to do with. So it really slowed down around August, September in terms of verification. So candidates were kind of stalling out. And that delay can be critical because, we roll our admissions, we roll our acceptances. So first in, first reviewed, right? Last in, last reviewed. So again, there's a sensitivity to the timing. October 15th is the first date that we actually have to make any offers. We want to be able to have as many offers available on October 15th as possible. There's something really unique and genuine about being offered a seat from a school for the first offer. We feel like that first offer has a lot of significance. So we're always trying to get there, but we also know that if the balance of our pool is coming after October 15th because of delayed applications, we may be missing out on good candidates, but we've also hit our volume ceiling. So our reviews start slowing down a little bit more once we get to that point. So this is why a lot of candidates, despite having really strong applications, if they apply in September or October, they may not have the success that they feel like they're going to have. And a lot of that has to do with that verification process, that review process with that school, again, first in, first reviewed, you always end up with a backlog. Once you get into September, October, there could be hundreds, if not thousands of files still in line. So unless you have, very proactive about advocating for yourself, you're reaching out to the medical school, let them know, hey, I know my application was delayed, but here it is. Updating, as I said, that's another way that we can identify real interest. So even if you did apply in October, if you're updating frequently, we'll see that. And we'll be interested, because that may actually be more compelling than other candidates who have been sort of, lingering in the line, but haven't really reached out to us.
Thank you. And I also saw like around 9,000 students applied, and around like 700 get an interview. So around like how many students get into the program?
Yeah, so our enrollment capacity is 170. So, we haven't really hit 700 interviews the last 2 years. We've only had at most 575 interviews. And that's because we still want to have this construct of having in-person and virtual interviews. A lot of schools are just doing virtual interviews, so they're able to interview twice as many people as we are. Now, the value of those interviews, there is something to be said for the virtual landscape. It is an interview. I don't want to dismiss it as not being a reasonable interview platform. But if you're in person, then you as an individual have discerned more about that institution. You've discerned more about its students, about its environment. So you obviously have a stronger connection to that school. So we tend to focus more on the quality and not the quantity. But I think a lot of schools have gone to the virtual model because they are looking at quantity. They want more applicants to make, greater number of decisions that they can yield a stronger class. But the back end of that, and the consequence of that, as I've heard from a lot of my colleagues in the allopathic world, is that they have so many candidates and it's multiplied across the country. So now there are so many programs that have had so many candidates interviewing that they've made so many offers. Now, all of these candidates who everybody wants, they all have multiple offers now. And the thing about multiple offers is that they become trophies to candidates. They want to hold on to them. And what AMCAS says is that you as an individual have to plan to enroll, and then you have to commit to enroll. So even that landscape's changed. It used to be that we got a report once a month to tell us where the candidate pool was. So if you had applied to us, we could see if you were holding us, if you were being offered another seat or multiple seats. We can't see any of that anymore. So the disadvantage for us is really an advantage for the candidate. And that advantage has really forestalled a lot of consideration for how this is going to go. There's a lot of uncertainty for medical schools. So, I think that, it's always interesting to think about, like the value of your applications, the number of schools you have, and knowing that if you really want to go to a program and you are offered a seat, that you should really try to make that decision, within a reasonable amount of time. A lot of the ways the timeline works now don't really work that well. And I think it creates a real logjam, and it actually makes the cycle longer because now it takes candidates longer to make their decision. So there'll be a lot more waitlist action, which is good for a lot of folks, but it's just more delay in the process. And I know there are some candidates that kind of lose interest. They start applying to post-bac programs in, May or June because they don't feel like they have a shot. I've seen a lot of really surprised candidates getting offers in June or July who had already, put down money and deposits on a post-bac program or a graduate program. So like I said, it's you really are going to have to be patient. And I think this dynamic, because of the virtual interviews and the PT, CT process, is really going to make this a true 13-month cycle for many people.
But I think in terms of numbers, is 100% of people that don't apply don't get in. So I think
Right.
everybody's always looking for this game number, but ultimately, you know, because you don't know what happens one year to the other. Some things get hot, some things get cold.
Right.
So you can't predict that, you know.
Yeah, this is not something you can try to game or try to predict. It's very true. Every cycle is different. As I said, 2021, we had over 62,000 applications in the pool, and no one knew what to do with that. There were so many applications, but the thing is, the number of seats doesn't change. So there may be more applicants, but the number of seats, which is about 22,000, doesn't change. So again, that's a 40% yield in most cycles. And when there's obviously more applications, then the yield rate goes down, and making it harder to get in. But we've seen the numbers go up, we've seen them go down. Everyone is down this year. The entire pool is down about 10%. So, you know, next year, is it going to be down even more? We don't know. And if that's the case, then you're going to have a repeat of what's happening now, with schools really increasing the number of interviews. Now you've got all these interviews, and maybe you have more offers, but is that going to diminish the amount of resources that are going to be available once you get a seat? Is there less financial aid because there's so many more candidates in consideration? Is there going to be kind of a watering down of the opportunities? Is it going to be more advantageous to go into the DO consideration because they may have more opportunities for entry because of the way that they process their applications? So those are all really important questions. But I think it's great, you know, because there is a definite need for more physicians. We just need more seats. And there are medical schools coming on board in the next few years, but they're capped at their enrollment number of 50 until they meet their accreditation 3 years after they open. And we know that there are some programs that are new that still haven't even achieved the opportunity to get full accreditation. So everyone has to understand, and particularly if you're on the West Coast, like, your options are feeling more and more limited because of the volume of applications that exist in that region. But if you lived in the South, if you lived in the Southern United States, you're in hog heaven, because they're opening more and more medical schools. They're advancing more opportunities to students in the southern states. Texas is becoming a really big player now. They're really going after not just their own students in their own state, but students from across the country. And I think that's another population that is gaining some traction, because they have their own system, so they don't have to report out to anyone. We don't really have any idea what's happening there, or who's holding there, or who has an opportunity there. So a lot of interesting things happening out there.
I have a question about that. Do medicals have a preference when an applicant is from the same state than from a different state?
Well, it depends. So we're a private school. Of the 5 allopathic schools in Chicago, only UIC is a state school. But even UIC has a predominance of out-of-state applicants. That's just the nature of Illinois. Our population and size, and in terms of, you know, that typical demographic age that is seeking medical school admission is smaller than a lot of states. So we draw from a regional consideration. We draw the majority of our candidates from California and the West Coast. So that's another important consideration for those of you out there on the West Coast, is that you have so many students who fit that demographic of being eligible and ready to go to medical school, that there's a flood of them, like, literally diasporing out of California seeking medical school matriculation in a lot of different places. That's what Texas is really taking advantage of. But if you are, let's say you have an offer at a state school and a private school, most private schools are going to be more expensive because the state subsidizes the enrollment and tuition costs for in-state residents. So if you live in Illinois, to go to UIC is about half the price of going to Stritch. We have a lot of students who come to us who live in Illinois or who have residency in Illinois because they are seeking out our opportunities for our training program. The real value add for us is our training model. We actually give you 2 extra sub-Is in your training. Doesn't sound like a lot, doesn't sound that significant, but when you're an intern and you go into your first year residency, your PGY2, it all makes sense how that has made you a more effective professional, how that has set you up for success as a resident. That's the goal, because training is 4 years of medical school, 1 year of internship, 3 to 5 years of residency. Our goal is to make you the best intern on your rotation to make you eligible for that chief residency spot when you get into your PGY2. And we have a preponderance of students that are successful in that range. So that kind of guides you on your way with your career. The shiny object in front of you is that discounted tuition, is that, you know, whatever they're offering as a value add on the first year of your medical school, giving you that EMT or whatever. Like, that's great, but it doesn't really matter that much on the short end of things if you can't get to the end and be successful going into that residency track. So that's our value add. So if you're thinking about that from a state perspective, I'm living in Illinois and I have those 2 offers. The other thing about state funding and state programs is they're often not giving you a lot of individual choice. So for UIC, they have 3 sites: Chicago, Rockford, and Peoria. Some people don't want to live in Rockford. Some people don't want to live in Peoria, but they don't have a choice. It's a lottery that determines where they're going to do their first 2 years at UIC. So again, there's a differentiation in cost, but then there's a loss in some other things. Again, is that more important to save the money? Perhaps it can be. But yeah, there's always going to be a distinction in terms of the state and the private school tuition rate. And again, you know, I just encourage you to apply broadly in both pools to see what your best opportunities are.
The next question is, how does Loyola view semester leave of absence for extenuating circumstance?
Well, that's a good question. I have a hat in student affairs, but I don't do this on a daily basis. I don't adjudicate these decisions, but I do understand that they happen frequently. You know, things come up, life happens.
I think their question is as an undergrad.
Undergrad. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Well, that's different.
If that's the question, if it's not, then type it in the Q&A.
Yeah, so even with that consideration as an undergrad, any kind of disruption to your pattern of progression is going to have some impact on your application. It's just going to look different, right? So if there's a gap that exists in a transcript, it's going to be really important for the candidate to tell us what happened, because if we have to assume, trust me, committee members are always going to assume the worst without really being able to know the real story. They're just going to imagine a situation that's going to be risky and they're going to move on. So if there is a gap in your program, if there's a significant consideration for personal health or family health, I know that sometimes those considerations are difficult to discuss, but the more candid you are about things, the more I think that the committee understands who you are and what that issue was. And I think that anytime you bring something like that up, you have to really think about having gone through the process of understanding how this issue has been an influence in your progression, understanding how you stopped and considered what is happening and try to take care of yourself or that family member, and then how you pivoted back into that environment to continue on your academic progression, because that is a demonstration of perseverance. That is a demonstration of being resilient. And that can be something of an attribute that you are expressing about yourself that doesn't exist with another person who has had a straight line progression all the way through undergrad into medical school with no significant challenges. So knowing that, you know, being a physician requires you to be able to pivot among a variety of different distracting influences and often adverse situations and maintain your focus and maintain your progression, you know, those things are behaviors that are evidenced in opportunities where you can describe adversity from undergrad and how you have been resilient. So I always look at those, if I see that kind of gap, or if I see that kind of disruption in progression, I'm always interested and hopeful that the candidate has given some perspective as to why.
What do you recommend including in the other impactful experience section?
Well, it's so new. I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen any application with that prompt responded to. So it's hard for me. I don't know what to expect. I kind of feel like it's going to be, so, you know, before there was the disadvantage statement, there was a section called additional information. And I would always encourage candidates to think about, you know, talking about certain elements of disadvantage there. So then AMCAS figured out, okay, a lot of candidates are talking about disadvantage there, so let's just create a disadvantage statement. So by stating other impactful experiences, my guess is that AMCAS has heard from its constituents, who are the medical schools, that candidates are just focusing on providing meaningfulness in the most meaningful experiences, in the 3 most meaningful experiences. So by stating it as other impactful experiences, my guess is that they're trying to nudge candidates into understanding what I've already told you, which is make every experience meaningful. If you're not doing that, if you're just looking at this like a CV, the AMCAS application is not a resume. It is not a CV. When I do a consult with a candidate, what are they going to do? They're going to set up the meeting, and then they're going to send me their resume. When I'm standing at a table at an exhibit space, I can have a great conversation, 20 minutes with a person. I feel like I've learned a whole lot about them. Second, they say they're going to leave. What do? They hand me a resume. It ruins the whole thing, because there's nothing there that really helps me understand who they are, right? It's just a stack of things they've done. And this is how many candidates approach the experiences. They look at it like, oh, I'm just going to take my CV and I'm going to fold it into this, the easiest part of the application. Well, honestly, it is the one part of the application where everyone is really interested in understanding why you did what you did, right? What kind of impact did you have? What kind of anecdotal thing that you learn in that experience that you're going to carry forward? And I'll tell you, it's really hard to find that outside of those 3 experiences. And there's really some powerful, deep, and meaningful responses in those first 3 that we see. But then when you start getting into these others, there's just so little information. This is, again, what I'm thinking is happening is that, you know, the schools have said, well, let's just give them a space. If they're not going to tell us in these 12 other experiences how meaningful they are, maybe they can just boil it down into a succinct statement. Maybe they can tease out some of those elements that we're really looking for. Again, most medical schools are looking for the same thing, because we're trying to train you for the same vocation, right? So all those details I provided about emotional intelligence and empathy and adaptability and flexibility, like those are the things we're trying to assess. So this is more of a nudge to the applicant to help us understand those details. So if you're not going to provide them in the place where we hope and expect you will provide them, here's another chance. Because again, the disadvantage statement, not everyone's going to fill that out. Not everyone is going to have disadvantage. I question why replace and not add. Why replace the disadvantage statement? Why not add to this application other meaningful or impactful experiences and keep the disadvantage statement? I don't know. But it's not my decision.
What they say is above your pay grade.
Exactly. Way above.
The next question is, how many credits do you recommend taking per semester?
Well, it depends on if you're on a quarter system or a semester system. It's hard for me to say. It just has to, again, community college is different in that it's going to be paced in a different way. And if you're working while you're going to school, you have to make decisions about how you're going to factor in your time to prepare for your courses and to be your best and to be successful. So, sorry. I just think a lot of it is really, based on your own experience. Again, most of what I see from community colleges is that, candidates have acquired quite a few credits towards an associate's degree, and then move into that space for the four-year institution for the last couple of years of their progression. But again, taking more challenging courses is often what they're trying to do to correlate to the success they've had in community college. And I think that that's appropriate. Ultimately, I think the value is in having enough evidence over a sustained period of time to demonstrate that the challenging courses you've taken have yielded outcomes that are consistent. So if that means that the number of courses that you've taken is commensurate with having a lot of success over time, then that's just something that is going to be expected as a behavior no matter where you are. So if you pivot to a 4-year for the last 2 years, or you pivot to a graduate program, the expectation is going to be that you're doing the same. What I see often, and what I would say would be troubling, is if you have a lot of credits, but you're still kind of dipping into this average realm of outcomes, right? You're kind of carrying that high C, low B average across, 140 credits. I mean, that in and of itself is going to maybe not demonstrate the kind of trend line that schools want to see. And schools are always going to want to see the trend line increase from the start of your progression to the end. So no matter how many credits it takes you to show that progression of an upward trend, wherever you stop that progression, have a correlative point of contrast, right? The MCAT. That is the thing that most want to see at the end of that progression. So if you're going through junior college or CC, you get into that last 2 years in the 4-year university, or you go into a postgraduate program, give it all the opportunity to build a solid foundation of knowledge, and then demonstrate the correlation with the MCAT. Because if you do it in reverse, or you do it out of sequence, then it doesn't really help the committee understand how the foundation of knowledge has been applied to the structure of the test environment. That's a big, big question. And again, I'm not talking about hitting any type of number on the test. I'm trying to help you understand that it's all about seeing that progression match up. So if you've taken 3 MCATs across this progression and you get to the end and you take that 4th MCAT, and again, I've said multiple MCATs can be bad, but if that correlation demonstrates that you have hit that progression at the end of that, that MCAT score is higher, you have a progression of grades going in an upward trend, more rigor applied. That is the kind of thing you want to see going into medical school, because you understand medical school will be much more challenging than anything else you have done academically. So knowing that you're ready for that, you have to demonstrate an upward trend towards medical school. Some cases, candidates will take their core, they'll take the MCAT again, and let's say it's the second score, but it's lower than the first. Well, that represents a risk to the medical schools because now we're seeing that the knowledge gained is not necessarily helping the candidate prepare for the standardized test. So give yourself time. Give yourself time to progress. Give yourself time to prepare for the exam, and then do your best on the exam. That's the best possible progression that you can have, because that is the most reasonable progression to simulate the environment of medical school. You know, you're not going to take your board. You don't have the flexibility to take your boards whenever. You know, you're going to take them after that 2-year progression. And everyone is going to hopefully be in the same place progression-wise when they're preparing for that exam. When you take your second board exam, going through your 3rd year into your 4th year, the expectation is that everyone is progressing similarly and preparing similarly because you're given protected time. Medical schools are going to give you at least a month to prepare for the first board exam. They're going to give you at least a couple of weeks to prepare for the second board exam. So if you're not giving yourself time to prepare for the exams, then you're not simulating the exact environment at medical school. So you have to give yourself every opportunity to be successful and give yourself the time you need to do that.
The other thing is, Dean Nabers, is that we've seen this trend in some of the questions that get asked here, but also on some of the boards. A lot of advisors or college advisors, certainly at the community college level, are telling students to take heavy units to prove to the medical school or to the institution that you could hack that grade, not taking into account that if you're working 40 hours a week and have childcare issues or providing care and all these different stuff, you can't take 20 units. You
Right.
can't take organic chemistry, biology, calculus, and physics all in the same semester. It's just you can take it. It's just you're not going to do academically well because that whole rule of 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours of study time for each hour in lecture. And so I think the problem runs into is that a lot of students have this idea that, oh, I need to take all of these all of these classes that I could prove that I could do well, but it ends up hurting their grades and end up having to go back and do a post-bac or or delay their transfer or having to drop or doing all of these different things that ends up happening. And I think that's one of the big things that we've seen.
Yeah, well, I'm all for pacing out your progression to match with your considerations. I'm currently in an educational doctorate program. I take, 2 courses a semester. And for me, who works full time, like that's a lot. And, I could finish faster if I took 3 courses, but I mean, what would it do to my personal life? What would it do to my work life? I can't make that type of decision. That's not reasonable for me. So I think doing what's reasonable is the best thing to do. Ultimately, it may take you longer to get to the end goal. And I don't want anyone to think that they have to rush into this. Remember, one of the first slides I showed you was to apply when you're ready. If that means that it's going to take you 2 or 3 more years than the average pre-med, then that's fine. Ultimately, what you're doing beyond the coursework is going to add that essential element of qualitative attribute that every medical school is going to seek. If it's a family consideration, taking care of a child, taking care of a parent, working full time. Again, the experience of having to work and go to school simultaneously is not going to be medical school, right? So if you can handle that kind of adversity and succeed, then by and large, most are going to know that when you get to medical school, you're going to be able to handle the rigor because you're going to have one less thing to worry about. Now, that's a very different thing when it comes to family. Your family is going to likely go with you to whatever medical school you attend. And, I talked to a young woman just last week who saved it for the very end that she had a daughter. And that kind of changed the whole context of the conversation, because, you know, she wanted to know, is it something she should write about as an experience? She was literally going to add motherhood as an experience to her MCAT application. And I'm glad that she told me that she was a mom before we got off the call. And I said to her, you have to write about that in your personal statement. This is who you are. This is who you are. And I say that knowing from the perspective of a parent, knowing from the perspective of students who have had children while in medical school, this becomes who they are, right? Just today, a student came into my office who matriculated, 3 years ago. So she's delayed her progression because she, got married and had a child and has come out of that. Now she's in her third year. She's rotating in her emergency med or her IM rotation, but now she's thinking about fourth year and her specialty considerations. And she was a neuroscience major. She wants to go into psych, but now she's like psych and family medicine. My eyes have been open. My perspective has been changed. Like if I'm going to go into psych, it's going to be to protect my child and to be a resource for my child. And this is where I live now, right? So there's something very fundamental about how that influences your thought process. Does it build empathy? Absolutely. Does it build the sort of nurturing quality that is essential for success in certain specialties? Absolutely. So by providing that detail in the personal statement, I told her that that is really going to be an important aspect of understanding who you are. But on the other side of that equation, being able to suggest that support team, because she talked about living at home with her parents. And again, like that would be helpful for some medical schools to understand, because now we understand she has a support system that's with her. She's not going to have to bring her baby to class, hopefully, right? She's not going to have to be a solo parent without support while going to medical school. We know how difficult that can be. We've seen many students struggle, even with partners going into that construct. So, again, I think every situation is different. I don't want to generalize about anything. But again, I think there's been some very valuable and good advice about not managing too many credits than you can handle. Always thinking about what's reasonable for yourself. Again, it's not a race, slow down. Do what you need to do. You'll get to the end point, and don't worry about being too old. I'm a perfect example of that. I'm in a doctorate program in my 50s. If I listened to people tell me I'm too old to go into and go into this path, then I wouldn't be doing it. But I can do it. And I think that, medicine is one of those things that if you have a passion for it, if you know that that's your calling, then stay the course. Don't let people talk you out of it. But certainly, personal health, personal wellness, being balanced, those are things that are also behaviors that are going to be kind of identified within your application. And they're going to be, expectations of how you're going to be able to manage that as a student and a trainee in a medical school program. So applying that understanding, if I saw, 20 credits a semester in, 4 years, burnout's a real thing. Are you going to have enough left to get through a rigorous medical school experience? So again, like those things are going to matter at the end of the day. So be well to yourself, be reasonable about your progress, and don't let people, talk you into things you don't want to do. I mean, I think that advising is a very important thing, but again, you can't generalize about every single instance or situation for an individual.
We have one more question. So have you personally seen any correlation in terms of MCAT scores and medical school success with the students you have accept with lower MCAT scores?
So I've seen candidates who have had really low MCAT scores, and it's always a challenge to get them through committee. especially with what we know now about the new test. There was an opportunity in 2015 when the new MCAT was created and the 2-digit score went to a 3-digit score. We took chances on candidates because we had an opening, we had an opportunity. A lot of the dust settles on scoring, and then schools adapt and they say, okay, this is the range that we're comfortable with. These are the constructs of the score that we're comfortable with. Anyone outside this frame, is going to be risky. So when that score changed 2015, 2016, it was like, okay, now we have a chance to bring in candidates that we're going to qualitatively assess as ready for medical school. And we're going to do what we can to sort of ignore the score. And so this would be similar to what may have happened during COVID for some schools that said, we're going to waive the MCAT. We don't even care what that looks like. So do you trust in the faith of your qualitative analysis to make this happen and to build success for candidates? And, we saw quite a few candidates in that class struggle, but it wasn't just because of the MCAT, nor was it just because of the MCAT score that they had. There were other things that came into play. I would say more than anything else was personal wellness and family health. Those things were the biggest triggers of non-success. And in many cases, it was because the family was distant and they were not a support for the candidate, and they needed that support. In some cases, it was personal wellness. And this is before the pandemic, right, where this was an issue. And so obviously after the pandemic, it's become more seen as an issue that every medical school hopes to mitigate. But before COVID, it was more or less just pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality. And obviously now I think there are a lot more scaffolds available for students. But really great success stories in this current graduating class. There were 3 candidates that came through who had really low MCAT scores that I advocated for, and I fought for them. And in all 3 cases, their progression was delayed. They had hiccups. The board exam was a hiccup. We got them through by providing them resources to take the PASS program. The PASS program is a preparation program for the boards. And you can do PASS for MCAT, you can do PASS for a lot of standardized testing, but that reality set into me. I took a chance on those wonderful people and they made it through, but they struggled and it wasn't always easy. And we had to find a remedy. We had to find an intervention to help them with test taking. So that was not lost on me. I recognize that MCAT scores are a pain in everyone's, caboose. But as far as the predictive element of how that process plays out in medical school, it's hard to see its insignificance, because there is some validity there. And I think that if you're challenged by the standardized test environment, if you're challenged by the MCAT, you have to find a way to get over that. You have to find a best practice or a methodology within your own strategy of preparation to mitigate that, because it's not going to go away. It's going to be pervasive throughout medical school, throughout any opportunity to progress and continue on your pathway to certification and licensure. It's gonna be an important part of that. And it's unfortunate and it's perhaps not reasonable, but that's the way it is, unfortunately. So everyone has to just become comfortable with that. And so whatever you have to do now to form that behavior to make yourself more comfortable with test taking, you should do it now, because if you wait, yeah, you might get lucky. You might get lucky and get a seat with a 485 or a 494. But if you're going to go at it thinking you're not going to struggle, or you don't need to think about strategizing to take standardized tests, you're going to be very surprised when you get to the point where you have to do that. So you have to really plan accordingly and know your weaknesses and not hide from them, because honestly, the smartest students find a weakness in medical school. It just becomes a part of the experience that everyone is exposed to some of their weaknesses. And they're going to have to make sure they're going to have to pivot towards a success. And they're going to have to be open about seeking help to do that. They're going to have to be open with themselves about getting past that point and developing that real mettle to sustain that success and get beyond that point. And I can tell you now, as attendings, there were students that struggled as trainees who are attendees now, and they have no issues at all. As a matter of fact, I talked to a young man who is attending now in our hospital. He is a participant in our committee process. He went from a committee meeting after a shift to take his CME exam right after the meeting. And I think this is like a 2-hour computer-based test. He did this after a shift, after a meeting, without blinking an eye. It's just that rote, that much of a behavior, not even stressing about it. So I think that there is some element to that it takes a while to get to, but I think if you're going to be successful in the long haul, that's something to try to achieve.
Thank you so much for.
So this is a couple of rapid questions. Any tips for applying as a couple?
Any tips for what now?
Applying as a couple.
Oh, couples. So it's easier to do in matching because there's an algorithm involved. It's harder to do in the AMCAS process because unless that person is a significant other, even if that person is a significant other, the thing about AMCAS, it does not give any kind of opportunity to describe in depth a relationship outside of your parents. I don't understand. So I can see if a person has a child, there's a dependency flag, right? A dependent flag. If I see 2 or 3, then I know the applicant has a child, but the applicant doesn't have to tell me they have a child. Okay, that's one of the protections. There's several protections for candidates. And again, they're protections, but they may not be, in your opinion, protections, but for some legal reason they are. And for us, it is a limitation in terms of information that we have. So I've seen this quite often. Candidates will say, well, I have a partner in the pool. Can you interview them? Well, they're not connected to your AMCAS ID. They're not connected to your application. So you've got to tell us who they are. And so this is another thing you have to really try to proactively advocate for when I talk about updates, right? A personal update would be, my partner is also in the match, also has high interest in your medical school. But your partner has to reciprocate. If your partner is going to stay silent and not try to self-advocate for that match, then it's likely not going to happen. So I think if you're going to go about an opportunity for this type of consideration, which we call a couples match, we know it doesn't really exist in medical school, but it's got to work on both ends. Both partners have to be actively pursuing similar programs, finding opportunities to advocate for their relationship within the scope of the application process. So again, knowing that AMCAS is probably not going to make that easy, you've got to find a way externally, whether that's communicating directly with the medical schools, whether that's providing an update through the portal, whether that is, calling the medical schools up front and letting them know your consideration. Like, you have to do a lot more work to make that happen. In the match process and for residency, it's actually a lot easier because you're ranking programs and you can rank programs similarly. You can visit those programs similarly. You can let them know that you're matching as a couple to them. That's an opportunity. That program may say, okay, this is a 2-for-1. Let's make it happen, right? Makes their job a lot easier in terms of finding employees. But for medical schools, we're not looking for employees. We're looking for students who can succeed. And the other part of that is that I have rarely seen in this, request that both partners are of equal caliber in terms of their they're fit. I mean, one's really strong and the other one isn't. So then, is the medical school going to relent or kind of go against their expectations of success for that one student that they really want? Again, I know that's harsh, but I've never seen it be this perfect situation where both partners are equally facile and going for it, or have identified one another equally as partners in the process. It's just made a lot more complicated. Not to say it's not possible, but it's something you're going to have to work towards.
All right, couple of quick questions. Somebody wants to know how many DACA students are admitted. I know that you guys were the first school, and also except probably one of the most out of any other schools, but
yeah, we've admitted over 70 students into the DACA program. We've graduated 38. So we still have about 40 or so in our program. Each year we shoot for a goal of having 5 seats. We have 5 half tuition scholarships to support DACA students in our program. The last 2 years we've fallen short of the 5 because we're being outcompeted for DACA students. And I think it's a good thing. When I started, we were like literally the only game in town for DACA students. And it was sad to see so many candidates having to wait until the next cycle to apply to us to have an opportunity. I think now there are plenty of opportunities for DACA students. They're getting great offers, in some cases in excess of half tuition, in some cases full tuition scholarships. We have the half tuition scholarship, and we have a loan resource that is rated similarly to the Grad Plus loan. So it's not a usurious loan or any kind. Obviously, you can get your own resource if you need to, but just getting that half tuition scholarship was really tough for us. And once we got it, we realized that other schools had surpassed us in terms of the resources that they can provide. And obviously, California can't be beat because they have the state supporting grants through the state programs that are allowing students to not have to pay any tuition. So that being said, we accepted 12 DACA students this cycle. We have 3 holding us. We've lost 9. Again, when I say we've lost them, there's someone else's game. I think they're everyone's game because they're going to be great physicians no matter where they go. But that's the reality that we're seeing now. We understand that with the DACA rule, it's going to be more challenging to actually have DACA students in the pool. We have seen the numbers diminish significantly over the last 5 years. This year was the first year we had less than 100 applicants in the DACA pool. And because there are no new applications being authorized, and the age of the eligible DACA students is just getting older, I don't know if those numbers are going to go up, and with the DACA rule, we need to have the DACA rule modified. We need to extend opportunities for new applications for DACA if it's going to survive. We were on a call today with another lender who's willing to offer a resource for DACA students. They're now talking about not just DACA, but TPS students as being part of their market. With TPS, it's not a status that can be coded in AMCAS. And trying to help them understand that was difficult. But, now we're starting to look at undocumented in terms of TPS status or adjustment of status or refugee asylee status. So we're going back to, we're actually regressing back to that time period where we were when I first started, where I would have phone calls or phone conversations with candidates back in 2008, 2009, 2010. Great candidates, great, qualitative features and quantitative metrics who had no opportunity to apply because there was no status that they could apply with. And I have a feeling we're gonna be regressing back into that. And I hope that we don't, or if we do, we at least come out of that quickly to give more students a chance. We need them There's already a projected shortage in physicians. We all know that that's going to affect, marginalized communities, communities with higher incidence of health disparities and economic disparities, and, preponderance of people of color like us are going to be influenced or affected by that. So it is a social justice issue, and we're going to go back to the drawing board. We're going to have to, because once the DACA population ages out, it's going to be hard to find those opportunities again.
Great. I actually have to get to work, so but there's just a couple of quick questions. Do good grades matter? And I think you really talked about this, that yes, grades matter.
Yeah.
And then somebody wants to know if they go to a fair or exhibit, what kind of questions they should ask. And
well, not to give them your resume. Do something clever, like give them a QR code, like I did at the end of my presentation. Handing them a resume, it's, people hand me a resume, it just ends up at the bottom of a thing of something. You can be creative about it. It's interesting. There are advisors out there now that like bring candidates up to our tables and like coach them on what to say. And I recognize that a lot of things have changed in terms of, the ability for people to converse with one another. I think technology has taken a lot of that away, but you just got to be comfortable just having a conversation with people. I don't find myself to be intimidating in person. I'm tall, maybe that's a problem for many, but I like to think I'm engaging enough and I'm willing to have a conversation with you. I think it's important when you're asking about a school, one of the more challenging questions is just to walk up to a table and hear someone say, "Tell me about your program." Well,
there's this thing called the internet.
Yeah, right. So instead of asking that question, do me a favor, don't ask that question. Instead, specifically ask about what that program has as added value for a candidate, for a physician trainee. There's a question for you. What does your institution have as a value added experience for physician trainees? Okay. So like I said, for us, I immediately can pivot to that answer, give you a very distinguishable response, which is we have the 2 extra internships, the sub-Is in our 4th year, 1 in the wards. Okay. The other is in the ER. And then obviously you have the ICU. So there's 3 sub-Is in that 4th year. So most programs have 1. You also have the opportunity for the elective away. So in our case, because of the dimensions of our program, you can do 2 aways and have 3 sub-Is in your 4th year. So that's literally 5 sub-Is setting you up as practice for your internship. Okay. So if you ask that question, you're going to find the most distinguishable characteristics of any program. What is your value add in terms of your physician training experience? And if they cannot answer that question for you, guess what? Keep walking.
And the last question is 511 a good score on the MCAT?
Well, it's our average, so I hope so.
Yeah, hope so. That's the first one. But second, what's your GPA? Yeah. I mean, I think people are just looking for single entry points, and it's not a single entry point. It's
what I would say about the MCAT, if you're struggling with what score to get, here's the basic answer. You have to think about the sub scores. So if you are above the 50th percentile in chemistry and above the 50th percentile in biology, that score is going to put you in the range of success. Now, that score may look different for some people. It might be a 502 for some people. It might be a 515 for others. There's going to be fluctuations in the cars and the PSBB. Like all of those things are going to kind of even out to some degree. but that's where we spend most of our time, and really kind of looking at the MCAT is looking at the dimensions of those subscores and how they correlate to courses that you've taken, chemistry courses and biology courses. Because we've gotten away from this idea that there's one single score that's going to be the score that beats all scores. Now, this is a very different way of thinking at Stritch than I had when I was at University of Chicago. Like, we had a very specific score. We felt the 520 was the range, and that's very high end, right? That's like the top 90th percentile of the pool, but that's what they want. That's what they wanted. So that's what they're getting. And that hasn't changed much. There are some schools that are going to hover in that range because that's their expectation. So again, like, I think that there's enough, variability within the averages to find a place where you can feel like your score is going to be competitive. So if you don't feel like the 511 is that range for us, or for you with us, then I would just say, we've got students coming in with lower MCATs than that and higher MCATs with that. But again, the MSAR, the medical school admissions requirements, can kind of give you the percentage ranks across all of those ranges of scores within the population of students that were admitted in the previous cycle. And that's the best way to kind of address that question for yourself.
Yes, well, it was really great having you, Dean Nabers. I'm sure we could be here till 10 o'clock at night, but I have to go to work. Well, 10 o'clock our time, probably. Really appreciate you giving us the time on a Friday afternoon away from your family and your schoolwork.
Well, my family's here because I'm at home, and I'm taking the summer off this year. I'm not taking courses, but I'll be back at it in the fall.
All righty. Well, I'm sure that that's quite a lot of work with a full-time job and family. But thank you again for joining us, and thanks everyone else for here, and hope everybody has a good weekend. And we have an event tomorrow with the Dean of Admission from University of Colorado, and hope you could join us. And thank you again.
Thank you, gentlemen, for the invitation. I appreciate it. Lady, thank you very much for your questions, and everyone.
She actually had to go to work. She was at
okay.
She was at work.
Such hardworking people, my goodness. All right. Well, enjoy your weekend.
Thank you, sir.
Reach out if you need any questions or need any help. Okay.
Thank you very much, sir.
All right. Thank you.